The train wheezed to a stop at High Mesa Station, black smoke dissipating into the scorching wind. Margaret Maggie Edison stepped down onto the wooden platform, her leather trunk thudding beside her. The promise letter in her gloved hand already smudged with perspiration. The June heat pressed down like an iron, and dust devils danced across the main street beyond. She had traveled 3 days from Chicago, her corset stays digging deeper with each mile west. At 36, she understood the weight of last chances. The newspaper advertisement had been specific: respectable widower seeks capable woman for matrimony, must be of good character, skilled in household management. No mention of age limits. No warning of what awaited. Ephraim Carnegie emerged from the shade of the station awning, his prosperous paunch straining against a checkered vest. He was shorter than his letters had suggested, with small eyes that swept over her like a merchant appraising damaged goods. When those eyes lingered on the silver threading through her auburn hair and the fine lines beside her eyes, his expression soured. "You're the Edison woman." His voice carried loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear. Cowboys leaning against the hitching posts straightened with interest. Women in calico dresses paused their shopping to stare. "Mrs. Margaret Edison," she confirmed, extending her hand. "He didn't take it." The advertisement said capable woman, not grandmother. His laugh was harsh as alkali water. "I need someone who can give me sons, not read them bedtime stories." The crowd rippled with snickers and gasps. A few ranchers guffawed outright, slapping their knees. Some of the women turned away. Whether from sympathy or secondhand shame, Maggie couldn't tell. She stood perfectly still, her spine straight as the railroad tracks that had brought her to this humiliation. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Carnegie," she said, her voice steady despite the heat crawling up her neck. "My letter clearly stated—" "Your letter." He pulled the correspondence from his pocket and tore it in half, letting the pieces flutter to the platform. "Written by that matchmaking service, no doubt. They promised a young woman of breeding age. You're past your prime by a decade at least." The trunk's lock had jarred loose in transport. When Ephraim kicked at it dismissively, it sprang open, spilling her life across the dusty boards. Books tumbled out, volumes of Shakespeare, Emerson, her precious typeface samples from her late husband's print shop, lead type scattered like bullets, ringing against the wood. A shadow fell across the scattered belongings. A tall man in worn leather chaps knelt beside her possessions, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Luke Rockefeller's hands were scarred from years of rope work, but they handled her books with surprising gentleness. He was perhaps 42, with premature silver at his temples and eyes the color of winter sky. "Careful with those," he murmured to a boy who'd started grabbing at the rolling-type pieces. "That's history you're handling." Their eyes met as he handed her a first edition of Leaves of Grass, its spine carefully mended with thread. The moment stretched between them, weighted with unspoken understanding. In his weathered face, she saw her own displacement reflected someone who knew what it meant to be catalog of losses. "Everyone has a late-arriving train," he said quietly. Meant only for her ears. "Doesn't mean it's the wrong destination." The words landed in her chest like cool water on burned skin. She wanted to respond, but Ephraim's voice cut through the moment. "So, Mrs. Edison can catch the eastbound tomorrow morning," he announced to the crowd. "This matter is concluded." He strode away without backward glance, his boot heels ringing judgment against the boards. The crowd began to disperse. Their entertainment ended. The hotel proprietor, a narrow woman named Mrs. Vanderbilt, approached with practiced sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm afraid we're fully booked," she said, though Maggie could see empty rooms through the hotel windows. "Perhaps you could try the church. Reverend Ford sometimes takes in stranded travelers." Luke straightened, his height casting Mrs. Vanderbilt in shadow. "The Elmwood Hotel has 4 vacant rooms. Mrs. Vanderbilt. I can see the register from here. Those are reserved for respectable guests. Mr. Rockefeller. Her smile was sharp as barbed wire. We can't have the hotel's reputation sullied by unfortunate circumstances. Maggie lifted her chin. I have money for a room. I'm sure you do, dear. But High Mesa has standards to maintain. Luke paid a passing freighter to repair the trunk's lock. His movements matter of fact, as if rescuing stranded women was routine as mending fence. When he offered to drive her to the church, she declined with careful dignity. I can manage my own transportation, Mr. Rockefeller, but thank you for your kindness with my belongings. Suit yourself. He touched his hat brim and walked toward a wagon loaded with fencing supplies. Church is 2 streets north. Reverend Ford's making rounds at the Roosevelt Ranch today. Won't be back until late. The hired conveyance was a wooden cart pulled by an obstinate mule named Jefferson. The driver, amused by his passenger's predicament, took the bumpiest route possible. When the mule balked at a puddle, Maggie lurched forward, nearly tumbling into the street. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. Luke had appeared like a dust devil, silent and sudden. Jefferson only moves for carrots or cursing. He said, I try to stick with carrots. Despite everything, Maggie felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. At least the mule doesn't think I'm too old. His laugh was rusty but genuine, transforming his stern features. Jefferson's older than both of us combined. He's got no room to judge. The church stood at the town's edge, its whitewash peeling like sunburned skin. True to Luke's word, the doors were locked. A note tacked to them, at Roosevelt Ranch. Return tomorrow. Reverend Ford. Evening came fast in High Mesa, the sun dropping behind the mesa like a coin into a well. The temperature plummeted. Maggie sat on the church steps, her trunk beside her, weighing her options. The eastbound train didn't leave until morning. One night. She could endure one night. Full dark had settled when she heard bootsteps approaching. Luke appeared carrying a wool blanket and a basket that smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Reverend Ford's been known to stay gone for days when the Roosevelts start telling their stories, he said, setting the provisions beside her. My foreman's cabin is empty, lock works, windows closed tight. I'll bed down in the barn. She studied his face in the lamplight spilling from the saloon across the street. Why are you helping me? Maybe I know what it's like to be measured and found wanting. He didn't elaborate, but she heard decades of weight in those words. Pride warred with pragmatism. Pride had no blankets. One night, she said, I'll be on the morning train. Your choice. He lifted her trunk easily, though she knew it weighed nearly 80 pounds with all her books. Cabin's clean. My late wife kept it for her sister's visits. Haven't had cause to use it since. They walked in companionable silence through streets that smelled of horse and leather and coming rain. The Rockefeller Ranch sprawled at the town's western edge, substantial but not ostentatious. The foreman's cabin was indeed clean, with a narrow bed, a writing desk, and a bookshelf that still held a woman's touch in its arranged dried flowers. I'll leave you to settle, Luke said, setting her trunk by the desk. Pumps outside for water, privies behind the lilac bush. I'll knock come morning with breakfast. He paused at the door, silhouetted against the star-drunk sky. For a moment, she thought he might say something more. Instead, he murmured so low she almost missed it. God finally sent you. The words hung in the air after he left, intimate as a kiss, unexpected as grace. Maggie stood frozen, her heart hammering against her stays. Had she imagined it, the whisper had been meant for the night. Not for her. Surely not for her. She unpacked slowly, placing her books on the shelf next to the dried flowers. Through the window, she could see a light in the barn where Luke had made his bed. The absurdity of it struck her, a wealthy rancher sleeping in straw, so a rejected mail-order bride could have a roof. God's timing needs work, she said to the empty room. surprising herself with a smile. For the first time since stepping off the train, she felt the possibility of morning. Sleep had been a stranger to Maggie for 3 years, ever since Benjamin died of influenza and left her with more debts than memories. Now, in this borrowed cabin that smelled of sage and old roses, she lay wakeful again, but for different reasons. Luke Rockefeller's whispered words circled her mind like hawks over carrion. She rose before dawn, a habit formed in her father's print shop in Boston. Patrick O'Sullivan had been a man of letters in every sense, an Irish immigrant who'd clawed his way from setting type to owning his own press. He'd taught her to read upside down and backward, to set a full page faster than most men could read one. Words are power. Maggie girl, he'd say, his fingers flying over the type cases, and power shared is power doubled. Benjamin Edison had seemed to understand that when he'd courted her, 10 years her senior. He'd owned a small newspaper and appreciated a wife who could edit copy and balance books. Their marriage had been one of mutual respect and quiet affection, if not passion. When the financial panic of '93 hit, followed by Ben's illness, she'd sold everything: the press, the house, even her mother's cameo brooch to pay doctors and creditors. The mail-order bride advertisement had been a last resort. The Chicago Matrimonial News promised advantageous matches for respectable women willing to civilize the western frontier. The agent, an oily man named Barnum, had assured her that her age was an asset. Mature women are highly prized out west, he'd said, pocketing her $20 fee. Ranchers want wives, not silly girls. Now she understood the fee was for hope, not guarantees. The letters from Ephraim Carnegie had been articulate, promising. She wondered now if Barnum had written them himself, changing only the names like a theater program with rotating cast. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. Through the window, she saw Luke holding a coffee pot and what looked like a bundle of cloth. She finger-combed her hair and opened the door. "Morning," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Thought you might want to wash up before town." He handed her the bundle, a clean dress of practical blue calico, worn but well-mended. "It was my wife Mary's. Been hanging in the closet 3 years now. Doing nobody any good." The kindness threatened her composure more than yesterday's humiliation had. "Mr. Rockefeller, I can't." "Luke," he corrected. "And you can—" Mary would box my ears for letting good fabric go to waste. She was practical that way. His smile was distant, aimed at memory. "About your height, too, though she'd have envied your posture. Ranch life had her bent like a willow by 40. Maggie accepted the dress, its weight substantial in her arms. Diphtheria, she guessed, knowing the frontier's harsh mathematics. "Lightning," he said, surprising her. She was bringing in the horses during a storm. 1 minute laughing at the thunder, the next— He shrugged. A lifetime of philosophy in the gesture. "Our boy Thomas went the same winter. Scarlet fever. After that, the house got too big and the world got too small." They stood in shared silence. Two people who understood that grief was a country with its own language. Finally, Luke cleared his throat. "I've got a proposition," he said, his tone turning businesslike. "Not the kind you're thinking," he added quickly, seeing her stiffen. "I need someone to manage my correspondence and accounts. The territorial bank's been bleeding me slow with their creative mathematics, and I can't make heads or tails of their contracts. You ran a print shop, you understand documents." "Mr. Rockefeller." "Luke," he insisted again. "I'll pay fair wages, $1.50 a day, plus room and board. That cabin would be yours, private and proper. I take meals with my crew anyway. No expectations beyond honest work for honest pay." Maggie calculated quickly. In 2 months, she could save enough for train fare to San Francisco, maybe even stake a small boarding house. "What about your reputation, a single woman on your property?" "My reputation survived worse storms. Besides, Mrs. Roosevelt Teddy's cousin has been managing the Double R since her husband died. If she can run 600 head of cattle, I reckon you can manage my ledgers without scandal. She wanted to accept immediately, but pride demanded negotiation. $2 a day, and I keep my own hours. His eyebrows rose. You bargain like a cattle broker. I learned from Irish dock workers. They wrote the book on negotiation. $1.75, and you join us for Sunday supper. The men need civilizing, and I'm tired of eating alone. She extended her hand like a man would, firm and direct. Agreed. His calloused palm enveloped hers, the handshake brief but solid. Welcome to the rocking arm, Mrs. Edison. Maggie, she corrected, if we're to work together. After he left, she washed and dressed in Mary Rockefeller's calico. It fit well enough, though she had to take in the waste ranch life had given Mary a sturdier build. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender sachet, and Maggie wondered if Luke noticed such things, surrounded by these gentle ghosts. She spent the morning organizing her few possessions. Her books filled barely half a shelf. The type samples she arranged on the desk like old friends. From her trunk's bottom, she pulled her most precious possession, a leather journal where she'd copied poems and passages that sustained her. Whitman, Dickinson, Emerson, voices that reminded her she was more than widow's weeds and empty womb. A commotion outside drew her to the window. Luke stood in the corral with a magnificent black stallion that danced and snorted like captured midnight. The horse reared, hooves slashing air, but Luke just waited, patient as stone. When the animal finally stilled, he approached slowly, speaking too low for her to hear. Within minutes, the stallion was eating grain from his palm. He's got the touch, a voice said behind her. She turned to find a Mexican woman with silver-streaked braids and knowing eyes. I'm Rosa Juarez, the cook. Luke said to bring you to the main house. See the office? How long have you worked here? Maggie asked as they walked. 22 years. Came with my husband Samuel when Luke's father ran things. Stayed after Sam died because... She gestured at the well-maintained buildings, the organized corrals, the men who worked with purpose rather than mere obligation. This place is family to those who need it. The main house was adobe and timber, built for endurance rather than elegance. The office occupied a corner room with windows facing both the corrals and the vast grassland beyond. Papers covered every surface in geological layers, contracts, correspondence, receipts, territorial documents. Mary tried to keep order, Rosa explained, but after she passed, Luke just stopped seeing the mess. Easier than seeing her absence, I think. Maggie surveyed the chaos with professional interest. I'll need a system, file boxes, folders, maybe a cabinet. There's good furniture in the attic. Luke saves everything. Rosa paused at the door. He's a good man, Mrs. Edison, lonely but good. Don't let the town gossips tell you different. Alone. Maggie began sorting papers by date and type. Within an hour, she'd discovered what Luke suspected the Territorial Bank had been charging compound interest on simple loans, adding fees that didn't exist in the original contracts. The amounts were small individually, but over years they accumulated like silt in a riverbed. She was deep in calculations when spurs jingled in the doorway. Luke leaned against the frame, hat in hand, watching her work. Found something already. Your banker Pike is either very clever or very corrupt, possibly both. She showed him the columns of figures. He's been adding a water rights assessment that doesn't appear in any territorial statute I can find. Luke's jaw tightened. That explains why he's so eager to buy my water rights outright, create the debt, then offer to solve it by taking what he wanted all along. We'll need proper documentation to challenge it. Do you have the original land patents water claims? In the safe, Mary always said. He stopped, cleared his throat. She always said paper was stronger than pistols in the long run. Smart woman. Yes, he agreed quietly. She was. They worked in companionable silence until the dinner bell rang. The dining hall buzzed with masculine energy, 20 cowboys washing trail dust from their faces, joshing and cursing with casual profanity. They fell silent when Maggie entered, suddenly aware of their rough edges. "Boys," Luke announced. "This is Mrs. Edison. She'll be managing the office. Anyone gives her trouble answers to me." A young hand named Roosevelt, no relation to the president, he said quickly, pumped her hand with enthusiasm. "Ma'am, can you really read, books and such?" "I can even write," she said dryly. "Sometimes both in the same day." The men laughed, tension breaking like a fever. Over beef and beans. She found herself drawn into their world cattle prices, water disputes, the coming railroad spur that would change everything. These men worked like their lives depended on it because they did. No safety nets on the frontier, just skill and stubbornness and luck. After dinner, Luke walked her back to the cabin. The stars sprawled overhead like spilled sugar, and coyotes sang their territories in the distance. "Thank you," she said at her door, "for the chance." "Thank you for taking it." He studied the horizon. "Most people see this place as exile, end of the world." "Or the beginning," she countered. "Depends on which direction you're facing." He looked at her then, really looked, and she felt seen in a way she hadn't since Ben died, maybe since before that. His gaze held questions and possibilities, held that whispered recognition from the night before. Asterisk, God finally sent you. "Good night, Maggie," he said finally, touching his hat. "Good night, Luke." Inside, she sat at the desk and opened her journal. By lamplight, she wrote asterisk. "The heart is a stubborn muscle. Just when you think it's forgotten how to hope, it starts beating new rhythms. I'm 36, widowed, childless, and somehow none of that feels like a conclusion anymore. Tomorrow I'll sort more papers, learn more names, plant my feet a little deeper in this red soil. I'm too old for fairy tales, but perhaps not too old for whatever this is becoming." Outside, she could hear Luke's boots on the porch of the main house, pacing like a man working through his own calculations. Two damaged people, she thought, trying to find their balance on uncertain ground. It wasn't a love story, not yet, but it was a beginning, and beginnings, she'd learned, were their own kind of miracle in a world so full of endings. The morning ledgers revealed stories that numbers told better than words. Maggie traced columns with her fingertip, finding patterns in Luke's losses that pointed to deliberate manipulation. Pike's bank had been siphoning money like a slow bleed, never enough to kill outright, just enough to weaken year by year. "Look here," she said, spreading papers across the desk as Luke leaned over her shoulder. He smelled of leather and coffee, and she forced herself to focus on the figures. "Every time you've had a good year with cattle prices, Pike increases the water assessment. Every drought year, he offers to buy your water rights at reduced prices." Creating the problem and selling the solution, Luke muttered, "My father warned me about men like Pike. I should have listened harder." She sketched a quick diagram showing the underground streams that fed the Rocking R's prosperity. "If we can prove your water rights predate the bank's claims, we can challenge the assessments. Do you have surveys from before Pike arrived?" Mary kept everything in the attic, said someday. He stopped, that familiar tightness crossing his features. "I'll need to look through those documents," Maggie said gently, "if you'd prefer not to." "No." He straightened, squaring his shoulders against old pain. "It's time. Past time, probably." They spent the afternoon in the dusty attic, surrounded by the artifacts of a life interrupted. Mary Rockefeller had been meticulous, every receipt filed, every letter preserved. Maggie found herself admiring this unknown woman who'd built order from frontier chaos. "She would have liked you," Luke said suddenly, watching Maggie organize surveys by date. "She appreciated people who got things done without fuss." Between boxes, they uncovered the original water claim from 1871, signed by Luke's father and witnessed by the territorial governor. It predated Pike's Bank by 15 years ironclad proof of prior rights. "This is what we needed," Maggie said, triumphant. But Luke was staring at something else, a small daguerreotype of a woman holding a baby, both faces serious in that old photograph way. "Thomas would be 8 now," he said quietly. "Sometimes I forget, then remember all at once." Maggie knew that ambush of memory. "Benjamin wanted children. We tried for years, saw doctors, prayed novenas, nothing. He said it didn't matter, but I saw him watching fathers with their sons." She carefully wrapped the photograph in tissue. "The world tells women we're only vessels. When the vessel proves empty—" "You're not empty," Luke said firmly. "You're here, setting my books to rights, teaching Roosevelt to read proper. That's not nothing." Their eyes held across the dusty space. Somewhere below. Rosa rang the dinner bell, breaking the moment. Ranch life shaped itself around work and weather. Mornings, Maggie reconciled accounts while Luke and his men worked cattle. Afternoons, she helped Rosa with household management, learning the economics of feeding 20 hungry men 3 times daily. Evenings, she'd taken to reading aloud on the bunkhouse porch while the hands mended tack or rolled cigarettes. "Never heard Shakespeare spoke proper before," said Darwin. "The oldest hand. Missing teeth, but not appreciation. Makes more sense when you say it like folks talking." Word spread. Soon ranchers' children appeared at reading time. Then their mothers, ostensibly collecting wayward offspring but lingering for stories. Maggie had created an accidental school, and the hunger for words surprised her with its intensity. Saturday brought market day. Luke insisted on driving her to town for supplies. "You'll need things for the office. Besides, it's time High Mesa got used to seeing you as more than a 9-days wonder." The town square bustled with commerce. Farmers sold produce. Ranchers traded horses. Women clustered around the dry goods store like flowers seeking sun. Maggie felt the weight of curious stares, heard the whisper buzz of gossip following their wagon. At the general store, Mrs. Carnegie, wife to another Carnegie, cousin to Ephraim, blocked Maggie's path. "Mrs. Edison, how interesting to see you're still in town." "Mrs. Carnegie." Maggie nodded politely, reaching for the writing paper she needed. "Of course. At your age, options are limited." The woman's smile could have curdled milk. "Though I suppose some situations are better than others, even if they're not quite proper." Rosa materialized at Maggie's elbow like a protective spirit. "Mrs. Edison's helping my Luke with his books. Very proper, very respectable. Unlike some people's cousins who promise marriage then act like barnyard animals at the train station." Mrs. Carnegie flushed. "Well, I never—" "No," Rosa agreed pleasantly. "You never do anything yourself. Just flap your tongue and hope others do your dirty work." The store fell silent. "Mrs." Carnegie retreated in a rustle of offended dignity. Rosa selected beans as if nothing had happened, but Maggie caught her small smile of satisfaction. "Thank you," Maggie murmured. "Pfft, these town hens forget who sells them beef come winter. They'll sing different when they need credit at shipping time." Luke appeared with an armload of ledgers and file boxes. "Find everything." "And then some," Maggie said, still glowing from Rosa's defense. They made several stops: the surveyor's office for map copies, the territorial courthouse for legal forms. At each location, Luke introduced her simply, "Mrs. Edison, managing my accounts." No explanation, no apology, just fact. The last stop was unexpected. Luke parked outside a small building with clean windows and a hand-painted sign, "High Mesa School." "Thought you might want to meet Clara Barton," he said. "She's the teacher here, Eastern educated, like you." Clara Barton was perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers. She greeted Maggie like a long-lost sister. Another educated woman. "Do you know how starved I am for conversation about something besides cattle and weather?" Within minutes, They were discussing books, educational theory, the challenge of teaching farm children who vanished during harvest. Clara's passion for learning matched Maggie's own. "I've heard about your evening readings," Clara said. "Would you consider doing something similar here? Many parents can't read to their children. You could bridge that gap." "I'm not a trained teacher." "Neither was I until I started. Need creates competence out here." Clara glanced at Luke, who was studying a primer with apparent fascination. "Besides, you have a powerful ally. Mr. Rockefeller funds half this school's supplies." Maggie looked at Luke, seeing new dimensions. He shrugged, uncomfortable with scrutiny. "Town needs educated children. Educated children need books, simple economics." "On the ride home," she said, "you're full of surprises." "Disappointing ones." "No." She watched the mesa's red rocks catch afternoon light. "Good ones. The kind that make a person reconsider their assumptions." That evening, Roosevelt approached her shyly after supper. "Ma'am, could you teach me writing? I can read some, but my letters look like chicken scratch." "I'd be happy to. When would you like to start?" Now, his eagerness made him look even younger than his 19 years. "I mean, if you're not too tired." She spent an hour showing him proper letter formation, his tongue poking out in concentration as he gripped the pencil. Luke watched from the doorway, a half-smile softening his weathered features. Later, walking her to the cabin, he said, "You're good with him, patient. He wants to learn. That makes it easy." She paused at her door. "Clara offered me a teaching position, part-time, helping with reading classes, and I said I'd consider it." She studied his face in the lantern light. "Would it interfere with my work here?" "Your work here is whatever helps you build the life you want." His voice was carefully neutral. "I hired you to fix my books, but I'm not your keeper. You're free to choose." Freedom. Such a simple word for such a complex gift. "I spent 3 years in Chicago being told what I couldn't do anymore. Couldn't run the print shop without a man. Couldn't get credit. Couldn't start over. Now you and Clara offer choices like they're nothing special." "They're not," Luke said quietly. "They're just choices. The special part is what you do with them." A coyote called from the distant hills, answered by another, then another, until the night sang with wild voices. Maggie shivered, though the evening was warm. "You'll want a jacket come fall," Luke noted. "Desert nights get cold enough to freeze water buckets." "I might not be here come fall." The words came automatic, her defensive habit of temporary thinking. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your choice," he repeated. Though the boys would miss their Shakespeare, and Rosa would miss having someone who appreciates her cooking properly, and the accounts would slide back into chaos. "And you?" The question slipped out before wisdom could catch it. "What would you miss?" He looked at her long and steady, the space between them charged like air before lightning. "Everything," he said simply. Then he touched his hat and walked away, leaving her standing in her doorway with that one word echoing in her chest. Inside, she lit her lamp and pulled out letter paper. She wrote to Clara accepting the teaching position, wrote to the territorial board requesting documentation about water rights, wrote in her journal about days that felt like years and moments that felt like lifetimes. Through her window, she could see Luke's silhouette on the main house porch, keeping his own night watch, 2 people learning to trust the ground beneath their feet. She thought, testing the weight of possibility, careful as cats on new territory. She'd told him she might not stay past fall. It was truth and lie twisted together truth because she'd learned not to count on permanence. Lie because something in her was already putting down roots, deep and searching as the underground streams that fed this unexpected oasis. The heart was indeed a stubborn muscle, beating its rhythms regardless of what the mind thought wise. And somewhere between ledger lines and Shakespeare sonnets, between Rosa's fierce protection and Luke's careful kindness, Maggie felt her own heart beginning to believe in more than simple survival. Tomorrow she would teach Roosevelt to write his name with flourish. Tomorrow she would find more evidence of Pike's fraud. Tomorrow she would stand a little straighter in town, defended by friends she hadn't sought but had somehow found. Tonight, though, she sat with her lamp and her letters while the coyotes sang and Luke kept watch and the stars wheeled overhead. Indifferent and eternal, blessing the small human dramas below with their vast perspective. Pike arrived at the Rocking R with 2 lawyers and a surveyor, their black suits stark against the red dust. From the office window, Maggie watched them spread maps across the wagon bed, pointing at boundaries with the confidence of men who believed paper trumped precedent. "Stay inside," Luke told her, checking the rifle by the door. "This won't be pleasant." "The documents are my responsibility," she countered, gathering the files they'd prepared. "Besides, men like Pike expect women to hide. I've done enough hiding." They met Pike's delegation in the yard. The banker was thin as drought grass, with eyes that calculated profit in everything they touched. His smile showed too many teeth. "Rockefeller." Pike nodded curtly, ignoring Maggie entirely. "I've brought the new territorial water surveys. Seems your claims overlap with public lands. We'll need to renegotiate terms." "Our claims predate the territory itself," Luke said evenly. "Mrs. Edison has the documentation." Pike's gaze finally acknowledged her, dismissive as a fly swat. "Playing secretary now. Mrs. Edison, I heard about your circumstances at the train station. Unfortunate." "Not as unfortunate as fraudulent banking practices," Maggie replied, producing the ledgers. "Would you like to explain these mysterious water assessments? I've found no territorial statute authorizing them." One of the lawyers, a ferret-faced man named Tweed, stepped forward. "Those are complex financial matters, beyond a woman's—" "I ran a print shop for 8 years. Maggie interrupted. "I've set type for more legal documents than you've probably read. Now, about these assessments." Pike's smile tightened. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Rockefeller, man to man." "Mrs. Edison manages my accounts. Anything about money goes through her." Luke's tone brooked no argument. "Show her the same respect you'd show me, or get off my land." The surveyor, younger than the others, shifted nervously. "Mr. Pike, maybe we should review the original claims first." "Quiet, Gould." Pike snapped. Then, to Maggie, "Very well. These assessments reflect the territorial government's new water management policies. All ranchers must contribute to infrastructure development. Infrastructure that doesn't exist." Maggie noted. "I've checked. No new dams, no irrigation channels, no public works, just fees flowing into your bank. Development takes time, and fraud takes planning." She opened another ledger. "Would you like to explain why the Rocking R pays twice what the Roosevelt Ranch does for half the water access? Or why these fees only apply to ranchers who've refused to sell to you?" Rosa emerged from the kitchen carrying a coffee pot, but Maggie recognized the way she held it like a weapon. The ranch hands had stopped their work, drifting closer with studied casualness. Darwin leaned against the corral fence, whittling with a very large knife. Pike's color rose. "You're making serious accusations." "I'm reading numbers," Maggie corrected. "Numbers don't lie, though bankers sometimes do." That evening, as if Pike's visit had stirred up more than dust, the matchmaking agent Barnum appeared at the ranch. He was exactly as oily as Maggie remembered, his checked suit wrinkled from travel, his smile fixed as paint. "Mrs. Edison. What a fortunate encounter." He mopped his forehead with a dingy handkerchief. "I've been searching everywhere for you." "Have you come to refund my fee?" she asked coolly. "Since your service failed rather spectacularly. About that unfortunate misunderstanding with Mr. Carnegie." Barnum sidled closer, lowering his voice. "You left before we could discuss penalties." Penalties. For breach of contract, dear lady, you agreed to marry the selected gentleman. By failing to complete the arrangement, you owe... Luke stepped onto the porch, his presence changing the air pressure. Mrs. Edison owes nothing to anyone, least of all to confidence men who sell false promises. Barnum's smile wavered. This is a private matter. Not on my land, it isn't. Luke descended the steps slowly, each boot fall deliberate. You've got 2 minutes to state legitimate business or leave. The lady signed a contract. Under false pretenses. Maggie interjected. You guaranteed a suitable match with a man seeking a wife. Mr. Carnegie wanted a brood mare, not a partner. That's fraud. Mr. Barnum. You can't prove... Actually, I can. She produced a folder from behind her back. I've collected affidavits from 6 other women you've swindled. False letters, recycled photographs, fees that mysteriously increase. The territorial marshal might find it interesting reading. Barnum's florid face went pale. Now, let's not be hasty. 1 minute left, Luke noted, pulling out his pocket watch. The agent retreated to his rented buggy, muttering threats about reputation and proper channels. As he drove away, Maggie felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of old fears. 6 affidavits? Luke asked, amused. 5, actually, but he can't count straight when he's scared. She smiled at his surprised laugh. Clara helped me track down the other women. Turns out, Mr. Barnum has been running his scheme across 3 territories. That night, clouds gathered on the horizon like bruises. The air grew thick, electric with pending storm. By morning, the sky had turned yellow-gray, and the wind carried the taste of dust. Sandstorm coming, Rosa announced at breakfast. Big one. Animals know, look how they're bunching. Luke organized crews with military efficiency. Darwin, get the remuda into the home corral. Roosevelt, help Sam shore up the barn doors. Ladies, we'll need every water barrel filled and covered. Maggie had read about sandstorms, but never experienced one. By noon, the horizon had vanished behind a wall of red-brown cloud advancing like a slow avalanche. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes. Inside, everyone, Luke shouted over the rising wind. Wet cloths for breathing. Stay away from windows. Maggie helped Rosa distribute makeshift masks to the hands crowding into the main house. Through the windows, she watched the world disappear. The storm hit like a physical force, rattling walls, seeping through every crack. Day became night in seconds. Thomas was afraid of storms, Luke said quietly beside her. They stood watching nature's fury through glass already opaque with dust. Mary would sing to him. Irish lullabies she learned somewhere. My mother sang those, Maggie offered. Carrickfergus, she'll be coming round the mountain. That's not Irish, he said with a slight smile. No, but Mother thought it was, and we didn't have the heart to tell her. In the storm's strange twilight, surrounded by rough men trying not to show fear, something shifted between them. Luke's hand found hers in the darkness, not romantic, just human contact in the face of nature's indifference. Then Roosevelt pointed toward the east pasture. Fire, something's burning out there. Through the storm's veil, they could see orange flickering. Horror dawned as Luke realized what it meant. That's our winter feed barn. If we lose that hay, the cattle will starve come snow. Darwin finished grimly. Without hesitation, men began wrapping faces, preparing to venture into the maelstrom. Maggie grabbed Luke's arm. You can't see 10 feet out there. Can't lose that barn either. He squeezed her hand briefly, then pulled on his coat. Keep everyone calm. If we're not back in an hour. You'll be back, she said firmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The rescue party disappeared into the storm. Maggie organized the remaining people keeping coffee hot, preparing medical supplies, maintaining calm despite the fear clawing at her throat. This was what frontier women did, she realized. They waited and prepared and held the center while men fought the edges. 40 minutes passed like hours. Then shapes emerged from the storm men carrying an injured Sam, Luke supporting Roosevelt, who clutched his ribs behind them, despite their efforts. The barn collapsed in a shower of sparks, immediately smothered by wind and dust. Beam caught Sam's leg, Luke reported tersely. Roosevelt got kicked by a panicked horse. The hay's gone. Maggie and Rosa became battlefield nurses, cleaning wounds, setting Sam's broken bone, wrapping Roosevelt's ribs. Through it all, Maggie noticed Luke favoring his left side. "You're hurt," she accused when the immediate crisis passed. "Scratched by fence wire. Nothing serious." But when she insisted on examining it, the gash ran 6 inches across his ribs, deep enough to need stitches. She worked with steady hands while he sat shirtless and stoic, the storm still raging outside. "You've done this before," he observed. "Printer's cuts. We were always slicing ourselves on type edges or paper. Benjamin said I stitched neater than the doctor." Her fingers were gentle but efficient, trying not to notice the warmth of his skin, the way his breathing carefully didn't change when she touched him. The storm lasted 6 hours. When it finally passed, the ranch looked like another planet, everything coated in red dust inches thick, familiar landmarks erased or altered. The winter feed barn was completely gone, tons of hay reduced to ash and scattered dreams. That evening, Pike's foreman arrived with an offer. "Mister, Pike heard about your misfortune. He's willing to advance hay for the winter at reasonable interest. Or," he paused dramatically, "he'll buy your water rights outright. Good price, considering your circumstances." Luke stood on the porch, shirt carefully covering his bandages. "Tell Pike we'll manage. Without winter feed, your cattle will be bones by spring." "Then they'll be our bones," Luke replied evenly. "Not his." After the foreman left, Maggie found Luke sitting on the corral fence, staring at the sunset painting the dust-hazed sky crimson. "We'll find a way," she said, climbing up beside him. He looked at her sideways. "Thought you were leaving come fall." "That was before." She gestured at the damaged ranch, the injured men, the challenge Pike had thrown down. "Before I became part of this, sandstorms and broken bones aren't much of a welcome. Better than train station rejections and hotel denials." She met his eyes directly. "I've been driven off before." "Not this time." He studied her face in the dying light. "You know Pike won't stop. This is just the beginning." "Then we'd better start fighting smarter." She pulled out her ever-present notebook. "Clara's brother-in-law is a territorial judge. The teacher from the Roosevelt Ranch knows the governor's sister. We have allies. Luke, we just need to gather them." For the first time since the storm, something like hope crossed his features. "Mary always said the same thing. Luke," she'd say, "you can't fight a wolf pack alone. Sometimes you need to build your own pack." "Smart woman," Maggie said softly. "Yes," he agreed, his hand covering hers on the fence rail. "She was." They sat in companionable silence. Two people who'd lost their first axe but were slowly writing a second. The ranch around them bore fresh scars, but also fresh determination. Tomorrow would bring new battles with Pike, with nature, with the careful walls they'd built around their hearts. Tonight, though, they sat together on a fence rail, planning war against those who'd underestimate them, and in that shared purpose, something stronger than attraction began to build partnership, forged in dust and difficulties, tempered by mutual respect. The stars emerged one by one, brave enough to shine through the settling dust, and Maggie thought that perhaps courage was like that, not the absence of storms, but the willingness to shine despite them. The days after the sandstorm brought a reckoning of losses. Maggie stood in what had been the feed barn. Now just charred timbers and memory. The arithmetic was brutal without winter hay. They'd have to sell half the herd at whatever price Pike's associates offered, or watch them starve come the first snow. She kicked at a blackened beam, anger flaring hot as the vanished flames. The fire hadn't been natural. Roosevelt had seen riders just before the storm hit, and fresh wagon tracks led away from the burn site. But knowing and proving were different creatures in territorial law. That night, alone in her cabin, the weight of everything crashed down. She sat on the floor, head in her hands, and wept for the lost hay. For the injured men, for her own stubborn pride that kept her here fighting battles that weren't truly hers. The tears came silent and bitter, tasting of dust and defeat. She didn't hear Luke's approach until his shadow fell across her doorway. He stood there uncertain, a blanket in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other. "Rosa sent the blanket," he said awkwardly. "The whiskey's my contribution." "I'm fine," she lied, wiping her face roughly. "No," he said simply, settling on the floor beside her. "You're not, neither am I. Figured we might as well be not fine together." He poured 2 modest glasses. They drank in silence, the whiskey burning away the sharp edges of despair. Outside, a screech owl called, its cry lonesome as grief itself. "I couldn't save them," Luke said suddenly. "Mary and Thomas. The fever took Thomas first, and Mary just gave up, followed him 3 days later. I sat right there, holding her hand, making promises about spring and new calves and all the tomorrows we'd never see." He stared at the amber liquid in his glass. "Sometimes I think the only thing I'm good at is watching things die." Maggie turned to study his profile in the lamplight. "You saved Sam in that storm. Roosevelt, too. That counts." "Does it, or am I just postponing the inevitable?" He met her eyes then, and she saw depths of pain that matched her own. "I look at you sometimes and think God finally sent someone strong enough to help me hold this place together. Then I remember what this land does to strong women. It uses them up, Maggie, makes them old before their time, then plants them young." "You think I'm weak?" she challenged. "That I need protecting from hard truths?" "I think you're the strongest person I've met," he admitted. "That's what scares me." The honesty hung between them like a physical thing. Maggie felt her carefully constructed walls crack. "Want to know what scares me? Not the work or the weather or even Pike. It's this sitting here, wanting to comfort you, knowing that if I reach out now, I won't leave come fall. Won't leave ever." Luke's hand found hers in the darkness. "Would that be so terrible?" "I'm 36, she said brutally. "Too old for children. Probably you could find a younger woman. Have the family you lost." "Stop," his grip tightened. "Just stop. You think I want to replace them? Think any child could fill the hole Thomas left? Any woman could be Mary?" He turned to face her fully. "I don't want a substitute family. Maggie, I want whatever this is, whatever we're building here." She should have pulled away, should have maintained the professional distance that kept them both safe. Instead, she leaned into his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. "I write in my journal about you," she confessed. "Tell myself it's just gratitude, just friendship. But then you smile at something Roosevelt says, or stand up to Pike like some frontier knight, and I forget all my sensible reasons for leaving." "Good," he murmured into her hair. "Be terrible if I was the only one forgetting to be sensible." They sat that way until the lamp burned low. 2 people allowing themselves the dangerous comfort of connection. When Luke finally left, Maggie felt both emptier and fuller, as if admitting the attachment had made it real enough to fear losing. The next morning brought Barnum back, but this time with official-looking documents and a territorial marshal named Pinkerton. The marshal was young, ambitious, clearly unhappy about being dragged into civilian disputes. "So, Mr. Barnum has filed a formal complaint," Pinkerton announced. "Claims you've interfered with his legitimate business. Mrs. Edison made slanderous accusations." "Truth isn't slander," Maggie replied calmly, though her pulse quickened. "I have evidence of his fraudulent practices. Evidence you obtained by harassing his former clients." Barnum interjected, his smile oily with satisfaction. Poor women you've convinced to lie about their failed marriages. Luke stepped forward, but Maggie touched his arm, stilling him. This was her fight. Marshal Pinkerton, are you aware that Mr. Barnum charges desperate women $20 for a service he can't actually provide? That he writes false letters, promises impossible matches? Business disputes are for civil court. What about mail fraud? She produced the letters she'd collected. Same handwriting, different signatures, same promises to women in 3 territories. That's federal, isn't it? Pinkerton's expression shifted as he examined the documents. Barnum's confident smile began to wilt. These appear to be concerning, the marshal admitted. Mr. Barnum, perhaps you'd like to explain. Misunderstandings, Barnum blustered. Disappointed women seeking someone to blame. Then you won't mind if I contact the federal postal inspectors, Pinkerton asked mildly. Clear everything up properly. Barnum went pale as parchment. Perhaps I was hasty in filing complaints. Misunderstandings all around. Perhaps you should leave the territory, Luke suggested quietly. Tonight. The agent didn't need further encouragement. He practically ran to his buggy, leaving his official documents scattered in the dust. Pinkerton tipped his hat to Maggie. Well played, ma'am, though I'd be careful men like that have friends in low places. After he left, Luke grinned at her. Federal postal inspectors. I read about them in a newspaper back in Chicago. Don't even know if they'd care about marriage fraud. She smiled back. But Barnum didn't know that either. That afternoon, unexpected help arrived. Clara Barton drove up in her teaching buggy, accompanied by 2 other women misses, Roosevelt from the Double R, and surprisingly, Mrs. Vanderbilt from the hotel. We've come about the barn raising, Mrs. Roosevelt announced without preamble. She was sturdy as her ranch's reputation, with calloused hands and direct eyes. Heard you lost your winter feed. News travels, Luke said warily. As does respect, Mrs. Vanderbilt added, not quite meeting Maggie's eyes. I misjudged you at the station. Mrs. Edison, the way you've stood up to Pike and that awful Barnum fellow, well, Christian charity demands I make amends. Clara's eyes twinkled. What my friends are trying to say is that we're organizing a barn raising. This Saturday, the whole valley's invited except Pike and his crew. Naturally. We can't accept charity, Luke began. It's not charity, Mrs. Roosevelt interrupted. It's community. Pike's been bleeding all of us dry, just slower with some than others. Time we stood together. Maggie felt her throat tighten. Why now? What's changed? Mrs. Vanderbilt finally looked at her directly. You have a woman alone is easy to dismiss. A woman who fights back, who helps others learn to read, who faces down federal marshals. That's someone worth standing beside. The barn raising became an event. Wagons arrived before dawn Saturday, loaded with lumber, tools, and food. Men who competed fiercely at cattle auctions worked side by side. Women who gossiped about each other organized meals with military precision. Children ran between the workers, carrying water and messages. Maggie found herself at the center of it all, coordinating supplies with Clara, translating Rosa's Spanish directions for the Anglo wives, mediating small disputes with newfound authority. When Ephraim Carnegie appeared, hat in hand, she nearly dropped her hammer. Mrs. Edison, he mumbled, not meeting her eyes. I've come to... That is, I want to apologize. What I said at the station, it was cruel, uncalled for. She studied him, this small man who'd humiliated her publicly. Why now, Mr. Carnegie? My wife left me, he admitted. Said any man who'd treat a woman that way would treat a wife worse. Made me think about things. He finally looked up. I'm sorry, truly. Apology accepted. She said simply, now pick up a hammer. We need all the help we can get. By sunset, A new barn stood where the old had burned, filled with donated hay from a dozen smaller ranches. The community that had shunned her now embraced her, and Maggie understood that she'd crossed some invisible frontier from outsider to neighbor, from temporary to permanent. That night, as the celebration continued with fiddle music and dancing, Luke found her sitting on the porch steps, watching the stars. "Tired?" he asked, settling beside her. "Overwhelmed," she admitted. 3 months ago, I was nobody, failed mail-order bride. Now you're the woman who brought down a corrupt matchmaker, challenged the territorial bank, and got the whole valley to work together." His voice held quiet pride. "Not bad for a season's work." "Luke," she said suddenly, "what are we doing this? Whatever this is between us." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I've been asking myself the same thing. Keep coming back to what Mary told me once, that love isn't always lightning strikes and poetry. Sometimes it's just finding someone who makes the daily work feel less like work." "Is that what this is, love?" "Don't know," he said honestly. "But I know when you're in the office, the house feels right again. When you laugh at Roosevelt's jokes. I remember what laughter's for. When you stand up to men like Pike, I remember what courage looks like." He took her hand carefully, as if it might break. "Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything." Maggie leaned into his warmth, feeling the solid reality of him. "I never expected this," she whispered. "Never expected you." "God finally sent you," he repeated, the words that had haunted her since that first night. "Just took me a while to understand what that meant." She turned to look at him then, this good man who'd lost everything and still found room for kindness. "Maybe he sent us to each other," she suggested. "Maybe that's how grace works, not in grand gestures, but in small mercies. A borrowed cabin, a job offer, a community that decides to build a barn. A woman brave enough to stay," he added softly. They sat together as the party wound down, hands linked, hearts cautiously opening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Pike wouldn't accept this community defiance quietly. But tonight, surrounded by neighbors who'd become friends, with a new barn standing proud against the sky, anything seemed possible. Even love, even hope, even a future built on ashes and determination and the stubborn human refusal to let cruelty win. The owl called again, but this time it sounded less lonesome. This time, it sounded like home. The county courthouse in Mesa Springs stood like a brick fortress against the October sky. Maggie adjusted her best dress, the blue calico that had been Mary's, and reviewed her notes one final time, beside her. Luke wore his only suit, looking uncomfortable as a Mustang in a parlor. "Remember," their lawyer, a young man named Hamilton, whispered, "let them attack your character. The more vicious they get, the more sympathy we gain." Judge Sherman, aged and methodical, called the court to order. The gallery packed with faces ranchers who'd driven hours to witness this confrontation, townspeople choosing sides with their presence. Clara Barton sat in the front row, pencil ready to record everything for the territorial newspaper. Pike's lawyer, Tweed, stood with theatrical flourish. "Your Honor, we're here because certain individuals have made baseless accusations against my client's legitimate business practices. These water assessments are standard territorial policy." "Then you can show us the authorizing statute," Hamilton interrupted calmly. "We've searched the territorial codes. No such policy exists." Maggie took the stand first, her hands steady on the Bible despite the weight of hostile stares. She presented the evidence methodically, ledgers showing inconsistent charges, correspondence revealing Pike's acquisition patterns, the original water rights that predated his claims by decades. "Mrs. Edison." Tweed began his cross-examination with a snake's smile. "Is it true you came to High Mesa as a mail-order bride?" "Yes." "And were publicly rejected at the train station?" "Yes." "For being too old to bear children?" Hamilton objected. But Tweed pressed on. How convenient that you found employment with Mr. Rockefeller immediately after. Some might say, suspiciously convenient. Maggie met his gaze steadily. Are you implying something improper, Mr. Tweed? I'm simply noting that a desperate woman might say anything to keep her position. Might even manufacture evidence. Like Mr. Pike manufactured water assessments, she shot back. I've provided documentation. Where's yours? Snickers rippled through the gallery. Judge Sherman banged his gavel, but Maggie caught his slight smile. The proceedings continued for hours. Luke testified about the systematic targeting of ranchers who refused to sell. Sam, on crutches from his barn injury, described suspicious activities before the fire. Mrs. Roosevelt spoke about similar pressures on surrounding ranches. Then Pike himself took the stand, all wounded dignity and righteous indignation. These accusations pain me deeply, he said, pressing a hand to his chest. I've only tried to bring modern banking practices to this backward territory. Modern like compound interest on simple loans. Maggie couldn't help interjecting from her seat. Mrs. Edison. Judge Sherman warned, though not sternly, you'll maintain courtroom decorum. As the afternoon waned, Tweed made his final attack. Your Honor, what we have here is a conspiracy between a fallen woman and a rancher desperate enough to hire her. There's so-called evidence. The courtroom doors banged open. Marshal Pinkerton strode in, accompanied by 2 federal officers and, surprisingly, Barnum in handcuffs. Your Honor, Pinkerton announced. I apologize for the interruption, but this is relevant. Mr. Barnum here has been extremely cooperative about his business associations. He produced a leather journal, including detailed records of payments from Mr. Pike for special services. Pike went white. That's preposterous. Is it? Barnum sang out, apparently deciding that if he was going down, he wouldn't go alone. What about the $500 you paid me to ensure certain women ended up at certain ranches, creating problems you could solve? The courtroom erupted. Judge Sherman pounded his gavel repeatedly before achieving order. Mr. Pike, would you care to explain? Pike's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Tweed frantically whispered in his ear, but the damage was done. I'll review all evidence in chambers. Judge Sherman declared, Court reconvenes tomorrow morning. Outside, Maggie's legs suddenly felt weak. Luke's hand at her elbow steadied her. You did it, he said quietly. Stood up there and fought like a woman with nothing left to lose. She finished. No, he corrected. Like a woman with everything to protect. That evening, the ranch felt charged with possibility, but as they celebrated with quiet satisfaction, Roosevelt burst in. Riders coming a dozen, maybe more. Luke grabbed his rifle. Maggie, get to the house. Not a chance, she said, checking the load on the shotgun Rosa handed her. We face this together. Pike's men stopped just outside rifle range. Their leader, a scarred man named Hickok, called out, Rockefeller, mister. Pike wants to negotiate. Meet him at Shepherd's Canyon. Alone. It's a trap. Darwin spat tobacco juice dismissively. Of course it is. Luke agreed. Tell Pike if he wants to talk. He comes here in daylight, unarmed. He won't like that. Then he can explain it to the federal marshals. Maggie called out. They're very interested in his activities. The riders milled uncertainly. They'd expected frightened victims, not organized resistance. Finally, Hickok wheeled his horse around. This ain't over. No, Luke agreed grimly. It's not. They kept watch all night, but the attack didn't come. Dawn brought unexpected news Pike had fled in the night, abandoning his bank, his schemes, and his hired guns who scattered like tumbleweeds without pay. Judge Sherman's ruling came swift and decisive. All fraudulent assessments were voided. Water rights reverted to original claims. The abandoned bank assets would be liquidated to compensate victims. Maggie listened to the verdict with tears. She didn't try to hide tears of relief, vindication, and something deeper. Back at the ranch, the mood was jubilant but cautious. Pike might be gone, but his influence lingered like smoke damage. It would take time to fully heal the community's wounds. "You know he'll be back," Luke said that evening. They stood by the corral, watching horses settle for the night. "Men like Pike don't give up easily." "Then we'll be ready," Maggie replied. "The whole valley will be ready." He turned to her then, something shifting in his expression. "Maggie, I need to say something. Should have said it sooner, but I was scared. Still am." She waited, heart hammering. "That first night, when I said God finally sent you, I meant it, but not the way you might think." He struggled with words, this man more comfortable with actions. "I wasn't asking God for another Mary. I was asking for help to let her go, to stop living in that cold space between memory and moving on. Then you stepped off that train, chin up despite everything, and I knew." "Knew what?" she whispered. "That you were the answer, not a replacement. Not a second chance at what I'd lost, but a first chance at something new." He touched her face gently. "I'm 42 years old. Maggie, set in my ways, carrying ghosts, running a ranch that seems to attract trouble. But if you'd have me..." She stopped his words with her lips, a kiss that tasted of dust and hope and all the complicated sweetness of lives lived past their first bloom. When they parted, she was crying again, but laughing too. "Is that a yes?" he asked, endearingly uncertain. "That's a yes to everything," she confirmed. "To you, to this ranch, to whatever storms come next. Yes to building something from ashes. Yes to chosen family and found community. Yes to love that arrives on its own schedule." They were married a week later in the church where she'd once slept on the steps. The whole valley attended, ranchers and farmers, teachers and cowboys, even Mrs. Vanderbilt, who wept through the entire ceremony. Clara Barton served as witness. Roosevelt gave her away, and Rosa baked a cake that could have fed an army. But the moment Maggie treasured most came that night. Sitting on their porch now listening to the night sounds of the ranch, Luke had his arm around her, solid and sure, and she thought about circles completing in unexpected ways. "No regrets?" he asked into the comfortable silence. "Only one," she admitted, and felt him tense. "I wish I'd gotten on that train sooner." His laughter rumbled through his chest into hers. "God's timing," he said, kissing her hair. "Never early, never late. Just when we're ready to receive it." She agreed, understanding finally what grace looked like. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of companionship through it. Not the promise of easy roads, but the assurance of someone to walk them with. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and patient, blessing this small human victory against cruelty and loneliness. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, running a ranch, building a marriage, creating a future from the ashes of old pain. But tonight, Maggie Edison Rockefeller sat with her husband on their porch, no longer too old or too anything except exactly where she belonged. The heart, that stubborn muscle, had won its long argument with fear, and somewhere in the vast western sky, she could swear she heard the universe whispering its approval. Finally. The verdict rippled through the valley like water through parched earth. Within days, ranchers who'd suffered under Pike's schemes came forward with their own documentation. The territorial authorities, embarrassed by the scandal, appointed a special investigator. Pike's network of corruption began unraveling like a cheap sweater. Maggie established a new routine as Mrs. Rockefeller, though the name still felt foreign on her tongue. Mornings found her in the office, teaching Rosa basic bookkeeping while managing the ranch's recovering finances. Afternoons, she rode with Luke to check the herds, learning to read the land's moods like she once read typeset. "You're taking to this quicker than expected," Luke observed. watching her competently guide her mare around a stubborn calf. "I'm motivated," she replied. Then, softer, "I have something to protect now." The community, energized by their courtroom victory, began organizing in ways that would have seemed impossible months before. The barn raising had shown them their collective strength. Now they wielded it purposefully. Clara Barton spearheaded a territorial education committee. Mrs. Roosevelt started a women's lending library. Even Mrs. Vanderbilt established a fund for distressed ladies seeking honest employment. But victories cast shadows. One morning, Darwin found their water pump destroyed, pipes twisted beyond repair. A week later, someone cut the fence between Rocking R land and the open range, allowing cattle to scatter. Small harassments, but steady as erosion. "Pike's last gasps," Luke said grimly, surveying the damage. "He might be gone, but his money still talks." "Then we need to speak louder," Maggie countered. She wrote letters to every newspaper in 3 territories, detailing Pike's schemes and their community's resistance. Clara helped edit them into compelling narratives. Within a month, the story of High Mesa's stand against corruption had spread beyond their valley, inspiring similar revelations in other towns. One evening, as Maggie read aloud to the gathering crowd, their informal library had outgrown the bunkhouse porch. Roosevelt interrupted with urgent news. "Stage just brought this," he panted, thrusting a telegram at Luke. "From the Capitol." Luke read it, his expression cycling through surprise to concern to something like hope. "The territorial governor's coming. Wants to see our evidence personally." "That's good, isn't it?" Rosa asked. "Maybe." Luke hedged. "Politicians usually visit when they want something." Governor Cleveland arrived a week later with minimal fanfare, just 2 aides and a dusty demeanor that suggested genuine travel rather than political theater. He was younger than Maggie expected, with intelligent eyes that missed little. Mrs. Rockefeller," he said after the introductions. "I've read your letters to the press. Compelling stuff. You ever consider journalism professionally?" "I've considered many things. Governor, right now, I'm focused on justice." "Direct. I appreciate that." He accepted Rosa's offer of coffee, earning points by complimenting it in Spanish. "Here's my position. Pike's corruption has embarrassed the territory just as we're pushing for statehood. We need to show we can handle our own affairs without federal intervention." "Meaning?" Luke prompted. "Meaning I want to make an example of this whole mess. Full investigation, public trials, reformed banking regulations, but I need locals to lead it, people the community trusts." He looked between them. "You two have become symbols of honest resistance. I want you on the Territorial Reform Committee." Maggie and Luke exchanged glances. "We're ranchers," Luke said carefully, "not politicians." "Exactly why I need you. Real people who understand real consequences." Cleveland leaned forward. "This is bigger than Pike now. There are other corrupt bankers, other communities suffering. Help me fix it." That night, they discussed it lying in their bed, still novel enough that Maggie sometimes forgot and reached for empty space before finding Luke's warmth. "It would mean traveling," Luke said into the darkness. "Time away from the ranch." "Darwin and Rosa could manage things," Maggie pointed out. "And Roosevelt's ready for more responsibility." "Is that what you want, committee meetings and political battles?" She turned to face him, seeing his profile in moonlight. "I want to matter, to use what happened to us to help others. Isn't that what we do with pain, transform it into purpose?" He pulled her close. "When did you get so wise?" "Somewhere between the train station and the courtroom," she said against his chest. "You?" "Somewhere between God finally sent you and I do." They accepted Cleveland's appointment. The announcement sparked mixed reactions, pride from their supporters, renewed harassment from Pike's lingering allies. The vandalism escalated, poisoned waterholes, burned haystacks, dead cattle with no apparent cause. "They're trying to drive us out before we can testify," Luke said, examining their 3rd dead steer in a week. "Then they don't know us very well." Maggie replied, though fear gnawed at her edges. Each attack felt more personal, more vicious. The breaking point came during the harvest dance. The whole community had gathered at the rocking iron lantern strung between trees. Fiddle music painting the night gold. Maggie danced with Luke, feeling for once purely happy, purely home. Then the screaming started. Fire engulfed the east hayfield, flames racing through dry grass toward the buildings. But this was different from the sandstorm fire deliberate, with multiple ignition points creating a wall of destruction. "Water brigade," Luke shouted, all celebration forgotten. Women and children to the main house, but Maggie was already running toward the pump house, Rosa beside her. They'd drilled for this, practiced after the barn fire. She took charge of the bucket line while Luke and the men fought to create fire breaks. Through smoke and chaos, she saw him Hickok, Pike's former enforcer, silhouetted against flames with a torch in hand. Their eyes met across the inferno. He smiled, raised the torch toward the main house where children huddled. The shot came from behind Maggie. Misses. Roosevelt stood with a smoking rifle, face grim as granite. Hickok's torch fell harmlessly as he clutched his shoulder, cursing. "Nobody threatens children on my watch." "Misses," Roosevelt said calmly, already reloading. The fire fought them for hours, but the community fought harder. By dawn, they'd saved the buildings, though acres of grassland lay black and smoking. Hickok and 2 accomplices sat tied in the barn, awaiting the marshal. Governor Cleveland himself arrived with the authorities, his political polish replaced by genuine anger. "This ends now," he declared, surveying the damage. "Pike might have fled, but his assets remain. Every penny will go toward rebuilding what his people destroyed." The trials that followed were swift and decisive. Hickok gave up everything to avoid federal charges, revealing Pike's location in Mexico and naming every corrupt official in his network. The territorial newspapers ran Maggie's first-hand account of the fire, cementing public opinion against the old corruption. But the true victory came quieter. As the ranch rebuilt yet again, something had fundamentally changed. The community no longer waited for others to solve their problems. They'd faced down violence and won through collective courage. "We did it," Luke said one evening, watching their neighbors help repair the burned fencing. "Actually changed things." "We started something," Maggie corrected. "Change takes time. Years, maybe generations." "Good thing we're not going anywhere." She smiled, her hand finding his. "No, we're not." Clara approached with a ledger. "Final tally from the education fund, we can build 3 new schools and hire 5 teachers. The governor's recommending territorial funding to match what we've raised." "Books?" Maggie asked. "Ever practical." "Enough to start proper libraries in each school. Plus," Clara grinned, "a printing press. Thought you might help us start a real newspaper, not just territorial propaganda." Maggie's heart leaped. A press of her own again, but this time embedded in community, partnered in purpose. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, to all of it." That night, as they prepared for bed, Luke said quietly, "I've been thinking about Thomas." Maggie stilled. He rarely spoke his son's name. He would have been 9 now, would have loved the school, the books, having other children to play with. Luke's voice stayed steady, but she heard the emotion beneath. "I used to think the only way to honor him was to preserve everything exactly as it was when he died. But maybe the real honor is building the world he should have inherited." She went to him, holding him as he finally let himself mourn not just the loss, but the lost possibilities. They stood that way for long minutes. 2 people who'd learned that love wasn't the absence of grief, but the courage to feel it fully and still choose hope. "Later, lying together," Maggie said. "The house Mary kept for her sister. What if we made it into a school reading room, a place for children to study when their homes are too crowded or dark?" Luke's arms tightened around her. She'd like that. Thomas, too, building forward instead of just hanging on. They made love then with a tenderness born of shared sorrow transformed into shared purpose. Outside, the ranch slept peaceful despite its scars. The new fence line stood strong. The water ran clear, and in the great vault of western sky, stars witnessed two people who'd found each other late but not too late, crafting from their damaged pieces something whole and hopeful and entirely their own. The territory was changing. High Mesa was changing, and at the center of it, Maggie and Luke Rockefeller were changing too, from survivors to builders, from strangers to partners, from mail-order bride and bitter widower to something neither had dared imagine happy. It was, Maggie thought drowsily as sleep claimed her, more than enough miracle for one lifetime, and yet she suspected, knowing the man beside her and the community around them, that the miracles were just beginning. Spring came to High Mesa like a kept promise, painting the scorched grasslands green and filling the arroyos with snowmelt. Maggie stood by the creek where Luke had proposed 6 months earlier, watching the water run clear over stones that knew nothing of human struggles. "Ready?" Luke asked, leading their horses. Today they would visit the site where the community planned to build the first new school, funded by the restitution from Pike's seized assets. She mounted gracefully, no longer the city woman who'd fumbled with saddles. "Clara says enrollment requests are already triple what we expected." Word spreads when something good happens. Luke replied, but his smile held shadows. They both knew education meant change, meant their isolated valley opening to wider worlds. Some of their own students would leave, seeking futures beyond cattle and crops. They rode in companionable silence until they crested the rise overlooking the building site. Below, wagons already gathered, loaded with lumber and hope. Roosevelt waved from where he supervised unloading. Now foreman, in fact, as well as function. "Ma'am, Mr. Luke," a small voice piped up. Little Edison Custer, named after Maggie, in a gesture that still made her throat tight, ran toward them, clutching a primer. "Look, I can write my whole name now." Maggie dismounted to admire his careful letters. Behind him came more children, eager to show their progress. She'd been teaching them in the converted bunkhouse, but soon they'd have real classrooms, real desks, real futures. "Mrs. Rockefeller," Clara called, approaching with rolled plans. "The architect says we can include a library wing if we're willing to fundraise another $1,000. "We'll find it," Maggie said firmly. The printing press had arrived last month, and their newspaper, the High Mesa Herald, was already turning profit. What about dormitory space for students from outlying ranches? As they discussed details, Luke watched his wife with quiet pride. The woman who'd stepped off the train broken and rejected had become the valley's heartbeat, not through trying to replace what she'd lost, but by building something entirely new. "Mr. Rockefeller," a hesitant voice interrupted. Ephraim Carnegie stood hat in hand, his wife Martha beside him. Relations had been strained since his crude rejection of Maggie at the station, despite his apology. "Carnegie," Luke acknowledged coolly. "We've come to donate," Martha said quickly, pressing an envelope into Maggie's hands. "For the school, it's significant." Maggie opened it, eyebrows rising. "This is very generous." "It's right," Ephraim said gruffly. "My boys will attend that school. Want them learning from someone who knows that a person's worth isn't measured in years or breeding capacity." His face reddened. "Want them to be better than their father." The moment stretched awkward until Maggie extended her hand. "Thank you, both of you. The past is past. We build forward now." Relief flooded Martha's face. As they walked away, Luke murmured, "That was gracious." "Grace costs nothing and buys everything," Maggie replied, tucking the donation away. "Besides, his shame teaches his sons more than any lecture could." The school raising became a celebration of survival. The whole valley came ranchers, farmers, townspeople. even a delegation from the territorial capital. Governor Cleveland himself drove the first nail, declaring it a symbol of Arizona's commitment to civilization through education. As walls rose, so did spirits. Children played between construction sites while adults shared food and stories. The Swedish blacksmith, Lindbergh, had forged a bell for the school tower. When they hoisted it into place, its first ring echoed across the mesa like a promise. "Listen to that," Rosa said, tears on her weathered cheeks. "Sounds like the future." But the past hadn't finished with them. As sunset approached, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. Luke's hand went automatically to his rifle, but Maggie touched his arm. "Wait." The rider was a woman, elderly and travel-worn. She stopped at safe distance, calling out, "I'm looking for Luke Rockefeller. I have something that belongs to him." Luke rode out to meet her, Maggie following, up close. The woman's refined features showed through the trail dust. "My name is Victoria Whitney," she said. I was Peter Pike's bookkeeper, his personal one, for dealings he didn't want the bank recording." Luke's jaw tightened. "If you're looking for protection." "I'm looking for redemption," she interrupted. "I'm dying. Doctor says 2 months, maybe 3. Can't meet my maker carrying what I know." She pulled out a leather journal. "Everything's here. Names, dates, bribes, including—" She hesitated. "Including what he paid to have your first barn burned, during the storm, when it would look natural." The words hung between them like a noose. Maggie saw Luke's knuckles whiten on his reins. "He killed my winter feed deliberately," Luke said slowly. "Could have killed my men." "Yes," Victoria whispered. "I'm sorry. I was afraid. Needed the work. But that's no excuse. I've written it all down. Use it however serves justice." She turned to go, but Maggie called out, "Where will you go?" "California. Maybe somewhere to die honest." The old woman smiled bitterly. "Too late for most things, but not too late for truth." After she left, Luke sat silent on his horse, staring at the journal. He orchestrated all of it, every loss, every struggle. But he didn't win. Maggie reminded him gently. "We're here. The school's rising. The community's stronger. Evil planted the seeds, but we grew the garden." That night, they called a community meeting. Luke read portions of Victoria's journal aloud, evidence of corruption reaching to the territorial legislature, of bribes and threats and calculated cruelty. The crowd's anger rose like heat waves. "We could pursue federal charges," Hamilton the lawyer suggested. "With this evidence." "What would it gain?" Luke asked quietly. "Pike's gone. His network's broken. We've won." He looked around the room. "I say we use this knowledge to prevent future Pikes, create community banking, overseen by locals, make our prosperity too distributed for one man to control." The vote was unanimous. They would build institutions as strong as their school walls, as clear as their water rights. The past would inform but not poison their future. Later, alone in their bedroom, Maggie found Luke standing at the window, shoulders tight with old pain made fresh. "He took them from me," Luke said roughly. "If Mary and Thomas hadn't been weakened by that winter, stressed by the shortages, they might have survived the sickness." Maggie went to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Or they might not have. We can't know, can only know what is, not what if." He turned in her arms. "How do you do it? Find peace with the unforgivable?" "By refusing to let it define me," she said simply. "Pike thought I was worthless because I was past childbearing years. Carnegie rejected me for the same reason. For months, I believed them. But you—" She touched his face. "You saw me, not my age or my failures or my possibilities, just me." "Because you saw me the same way," he murmured. "Not the grieving widower or the angry rancher. just a man who'd forgotten how to hope until you reminded him. They made love with desperate tenderness, reaffirming life in the face of death's revelations. Later, twined together, they talked about the future, the newspaper's growth, the school's promise, the ranch's steady prosperity. "I want to create a scholarship," Maggie said suddenly. "For girls whose families can't afford education. Name it for Mary and Thomas." Luke's arms tightened around her. "Yes," he said roughly. "Yes, they'd want that." Dawn came gentle, pink and gold across the mesa. They rose to face another day of building not just structures but community, not just survival but joy. The coffee tasted rich. The air smelled of sage and possibility. And the bell in the new school tower caught first light like a blessing. At breakfast, Roosevelt burst in with the news. "Telegram from the governor. We've been approved for the Territorial Education Board. Both of you." Maggie and Luke exchanged glances. More responsibility, more time away from the ranch, more challenges, and more opportunities to shape the future they'd fought to create. "Tell him yes," they said in unison, then laughed at their synchronicity. The day unfolded in ordinary miracles. Maggie taught morning classes while Luke worked cattle. They met for lunch under the cottonwoods, sharing bread and cheese in quiet satisfaction. The afternoon brought newspaper work, ranch accounts, plans for the fall harvest. As evening approached, they walked hand in hand to the creek where it all began. The water ran strong from spring melt, and wildflowers painted the banks purple and gold. "No regrets?" Luke asked. "Their old ritual?" "Only gratitude," Maggie replied. "For trains that arrive late, for men who see beyond surfaces, for communities that choose courage over comfort, for women who stay when they could run," Luke added. "For second chances that feel like first chances, for love that comes seasoned with wisdom instead of blinded by youth." They stood together as the sun set behind the mesa, painting the sky in shades of ending and beginning. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would always be new pikes, new obstacles, new griefs to navigate, but there would also be new joys, new victories, new lives shaped by the institutions they'd built from ashes. "God finally sent you," Luke murmured one last time, but now it felt less like wonder and more like simple fact. "He sent us to each other," Maggie corrected, "and to this place, and to these people, all the sending, all at once. Good thing we were ready to receive it. Good thing we were brave enough to stay." The stars emerged one by one, ancient witnesses to human resilience, and there beside the creek that had seen drought and flood, but always ran true. Maggie and Luke Rockefeller held each other close, not as replacements for what they'd lost, but as partners in what they'd found. Love, late arriving but not too late. Hope, hard-won but not bitter. Home, built from scratch but built to last. In the distance, the school bell rang once, twice, 3 times Roosevelt practicing for tomorrow's first official day of classes. The sound carried across the valley like a promise kept, a future claimed. A love story that began with rejection at a train station and culminated in acceptance by an entire community. The mail-order bride who'd been deemed too old had found her place at last, and it was exactly where she belonged beside a good man. Among good people, building something good that would outlast them all. The heart, that stubborn muscle, had won its long argument with fate, and somewhere in the vast western sky, the universe itself seemed to whisper, "Finally, indeed." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and exchange thoughts about this tale of love and resilience in the Old West. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover and enjoy these historical narratives. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive.